David Blunkett quits the Cabinet again. He apologises for breaking the ministerial code of conduct.
So I am guilty of a mistake, and I am paying the price for it, and I make no bones about saying that that is my fault, and I stand by it.
Climb down on anti-terror laws. The government offers compromise to MPs. Down syndrome killing, the mother who smothered her son escapes jail. And a dinner date at the White House for Charles and Camilla. Hello, welcome to BBC News 24. For the second time in a year, David Blunkett has left the Cabinet. He resigned as Work and Pensions Secretary to be replaced by John Hutton. Mr Blunkett, who'd faced persistent allegations about his business activities, said he regretted any embarrassment he'd caused the Prime Minister, whose own judgment has now been called into question by the Conservatives.
An embarrassment to the Prime Minister, Mr Blunkett?
The answer to that question was yes. What David Blunkett didn't know when he left home this morning was that Tony Blair had already concluded that he couldn't survive. Mr Blunkett was supposed to be heading to an appearance before a Commons committee. When he failed to turn up on time, we at Westminster sensed that something was up.
David Blunkett was scheduled to appear before the Work and Pensions Select Committee. Nick Robinson is on the phone, as I say. Nick, is he there?
No, and that is a fascinating fact. David Blunkett is not only not there, he is at 10 Downing Street, I'm told.
When he left number 10, by the back door of course, he hadn't been sacked and he'd not resigned. On his journey to the Commons, he decided though that he had to go. Lucky really, because the word was already out that he had gone and his committee appearance had been cancelled. So it was back once more to number 10 to say his formal farewell. This, the last time he'd be there as a minister.
Come round this other side.
Political death is a horribly public affair. David Blunkett knew it because he'd been through this once before. This time, though, he knew there would be no coming back. There were no tears now, just quiet resignation to his fate.
I stepped down today precisely to protect the government from diversion, from the policies that we're carrying out, from the reforms we're bringing in.
He admitted, broken the ministerial code by failing to seek advice before taking 3 different jobs when he was out of office.
So I am guilty of a mistake, and I am paying the price for it, and I make no bones about saying that that is my fault, and I stand by it.
Resignation, he said, had been on his mind since last week.
You've been in politics as long as I have. You can smell and feel when it is right to step away.
The Blunkett soap opera has filled the papers on and off for more than a year. The tale of one man and his dog, his lover and his wealthy friends, simply became too much for government to bear. That still left Tony Blair to face Prime Minister's questions, to explain why he couldn't hold on to a man he consistently defended.
Whatever mistakes my right honourable friend has made, I've always believed and believe now that he's a decent and honourable man who has contributed a great deal to his country, who has overcome immense challenges that frankly would have daunted the rest of us.
But the Tory leader was not interested in today's political victim. Sensing blood, he wanted to make sure that Tony Blair would be next.
And I quite understand why the Prime Minister's judgment in these last few days has been awry. I can entirely sympathise with his desire to cling on to the right honourable gentleman, the member for Sheffield Brightside. Isn't it a fact that he was one of the Prime Minister's last remaining allies in the Cabinet?
If you doubt that hurt, just look at the faces of the Deputy Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
My right honourable friend resigned for the reasons that he gave, that it became impossible for him, frankly, with the frenzy surrounding him and his job, for him to carry on doing that job properly. As he goes from government, we should say he goes, in my view, with no stain of impropriety against him whatever.
This week marks the beginning of the final chapter of his administration. For how long will this country have to put up with this lame duck Prime Minister in office but not in power?
In David Blunkett's old office tonight is the new Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, John Hutton. Mr Blunkett himself tonight waved goodbye to his old department, to his political career, and to the hopes and dreams he once had. Nick Robinson, BBC News, Westminster.
David Blunkett's long career started in local politics, and by the time New Labour came to power in 1997, he was established as one of the party's star performers. His resignation, the second within a year, marks the end of a remarkable career, which culminated in his period as Home Secretary.
David Blunkett has been one of the government's most recognisable and most influential figures. It was a gamble to give him a second chance, but Tony Blair admired the determination which brought the working-class boy from Sheffield to one of the highest offices in the land. The young Blunkett grew up in poverty. The death of his father left his mother practically penniless. Aged 4, the local council sent him to a boarding school for the blind.
This little lad couldn't cling on. He had to realise that he was now going to have to fend for himself.
Intelligence and tenacity overcame those early disadvantages. He was leader of the council in his 30s and a national figure soon after. Eventually, the darling of the left would evolve into one of the sharpest brains in New Labour. When the party returned to power, Blunkett was one of the beneficiaries, in charge of education, Tony Blair's top priority. Soon he was promoted.
What does Home Secretary have to do to look stern and happy at the same time?
He shared the Prime Minister's impatience with judges and enthusiasm for the police. Mr Blair felt his instinct for what ordinary voters wanted was second to none. Then he met Kimberly Quinn. They had a son together, but once their relationship disintegrated, the bitterness would colour the rest of his political career. At first, colleagues sympathised as he endured a relentless series of lurid revelations, but when his biographer revealed disparaging remarks he'd made about fellow ministers, support fell away. Newspapers claimed Blunkett helped Kimberly Quinn's nanny to get a visa. He said he hadn't, but a Home Office official marked "no favours but slightly quicker" on the paperwork. The revelation proved fatal. Indirectly, the love affair had led to his downfall.
I misunderstood what we had. I misunderstood that someone could do this not just to me but to the little one as well, because there will be years to come. So the anguish of the weeks I've just had, and they have been the worst of my life.
Yet within 6 months he was back at a Whitehall desk again. Tony Blair must have hoped that any future controversies would be political ones. But he was soon under siege. Newspapers were fascinated by his membership of an upmarket club, his friendship with a younger woman, and the jobs he'd taken whilst out of government. The editor of his local paper blames the legacy of the affair with Kimberly Quinn.
There may be some financial aspects of this where he was trying to retain an inheritance for his sons, which he'd had to spend on a court case. So the two are inextricably linked, really.
In 8 years, resignations have robbed Tony Blair of many of his closest allies. David Blunkett was given a second chance. Tonight, few expect him to get a third. Sean Lay, BBC News, Westminster.
As the New Labour project unfolded during the mid-1990s, David Blunkett proved to be one of Tony Blair's most loyal colleagues. Once in government, that relationship was strengthened and Mr Blunkett was promoted. Gavin Hewitt assesses the likely impact of David Blunkett's second departure on the Prime Minister, who's now lost one of his most valuable allies.
Today was almost as much about Tony Blair as David Blunkett. For within minutes of the resignation, the opposition was asking what the departure of a key ally meant for the Prime Minister's authority.
This has been an extraordinary week for the government and for the Prime Minister. We have seen the slow seepage of his authority turn into a hemorrhage.
The Conservative leader was referring to the Cabinet, recently in disarray over smoking legislation and also divided over key education reforms. Some Labour critics also believe the Prime Minister's authority has been damaged.
I think that the Prime Minister has been weakened on several fronts. It's cumulative.
Other Labour MPs believe Tony Blair will find it harder to succeed with key legislation like welfare reform.
It has weakened the government because David Blunkett was a very substantial figure in his own right, and there are clearly, we know from the last 8 years, government has difficulty in getting welfare reform through.
David Blunkett's departure means Tony Blair has lost another key ally. Peter Mandelson resigned twice. Stephen Byers also had to step down. And later, Alan Milburn left frontbench politics.
David will be out of the government. That doesn't stop him being an ally and somebody that the Prime Minister can consult and somebody that the Prime Minister can talk to. And, you know, I think it's a pretty crude tactic by the Conservatives to suggest that David Blunkett's resignation somehow weakens the Prime Minister is absolute nonsense.
Other old allies insisted Tony Blair wouldn't be blown off course.
Successful governments are the ones that set a strategic course and see it through. The government has got a strategy, modernising this country, reforming the public services, modernising the economy, and that's going to carry on.
The real test of the Prime Minister's authority will come in the weeks ahead with controversial measures like the reform of incapacity benefit. And the question will be, to what extent can he keep his backbenchers with him on key reforms which he regards as so important to his legacy? Gavin Hewitt, BBC News.
And of course, digital viewers can watch David Blunkett's resignation speech by just pressing the red button and then selecting News Multiscreen. You can see it at the top there, right. Now, some Labour MPs have dealt the government a heavy blow tonight when ministers were forced to climb down over their new anti-terror laws. Faced with almost certain defeat in the Commons, ministers have agreed to look again at the highly controversial plan to allow terror suspects to be held for 90 days without charge. Earlier, the government's majority was cut to just one over plans to create a new offence of glorifying terrorism.
The ayes to the right, 299. The noes to the left, 300.
It was the lowest Commons majority the government's had since coming to power 8 years ago, scraping through with just one vote as Labour rebels joined opposition MPs, complaining a new offence of glorifying or indirectly inciting terrorism would criminalise the innocent.
A teacher or tutor distributing terrorist propaganda to a class studying history in the Middle East. Caught under the Act without a shadow of doubt, a broadcaster or newspaper.
And that wasn't even the most controversial part of the bill. With heightened security outside the Commons, ministers inside faced their first ever potential defeat over plans to hold terrorist suspects without charge, not for 14 days as now, but for 3 months. The police have been pushing for this since the July attacks. They want more time to gather evidence against the modern-day terrorist who uses complex computer codes and has associates worldwide. But critics wouldn't buy it.
We're talking about people being locked up all day and potentially repeatedly interviewed for a very long time before they get released without charge because somebody finally realises they've arrested the man of a similar name or they've been misled by malicious information. Home Secretary.
To avoid defeat on this, the Home Secretary finally conceded he'd have to cut the 90 days.
I do regard the police case as persuasive. I think it's the right case. But I also have to acknowledge, because it's the fact, that there are strong reservations which many people have expressed.
Which means he'll now have to reach a deal with opponents by next week. And they say a month should be the maximum.
If there's going to be any chance of this bill getting through the House of Commons next week, it will have to change fundamentally. And any ideas that a bill with 90 days, 40 days or 30 days could get through is wrong.
This is a hugely significant piece of legislation promoted for weeks by the Prime Minister as well as the Home Secretary. The government repeatedly said there'd be no backing down over the 90 days, which makes today's climb down all the more embarrassing. Despite hours of lobbying in the corridors behind me here, the Home Secretary simply couldn't muster the support to get it through. Margaret Gilmore, BBC News, Westminster.
In other news, a third man has been arrested by detectives investigating the multi-million-pound Northern Bank robbery in Belfast last year. More than £26 million was stolen in the raid, which has been linked to the provisional IRA. 2 other men were arrested last night in County Down. 3 more people have been charged in connection with the murder of the black teenager Anthony Walker, who was bludgeoned to death in a park on Merseyside. 2 other men charged with Mr. Walker's murder are going on trial later this month. Full-body security scanners able to detect objects hidden under clothing will be tested on railways and the Underground in London next year. The first trial will be at Paddington train station. A mother who killed her 36-year-old son, who had Down syndrome and autism, has been given a suspended prison sentence. Wendelin Marcrow had admitted manslaughter, but she told Oxford Crown Court that she'd snapped after many years of sleepless nights caring for Patrick. The prosecution had urged the judge to consider a merciful sentence.
Wendelin Marcrow was described in court as a 100% devoted mother who snapped. Her son Patrick had Down syndrome and autism. He was constantly harming himself and would never sleep. She was his principal carer.
Wendy Marcrow has spent 36 years caring for Patrick. And during that time, she's never given a thought to herself.
Giving her a suspended sentence, the judge, Mr. Justice Gross, said, "You'll be punished as long as you live by what you have done and what you have lost." At the family home at Long Crendon in Buckinghamshire, Wendelin Marcrow gave her son tranquilizers and then suffocated him with a plastic bag. She attempted suicide. The court heard that she'd written to the local social services appealing for help. They say she turned down much of what they offered.
The reason she stopped using those services was because Patrick's behaviour when he returned to her was very, very challenging, very difficult. He was very distressed.
This was described in court as a highly unusual case. Nevertheless, it does raise the whole issue of the pressure on carers, particularly those with adult children who will always need somebody to look after them. Wendelin Marcrow must now try to pick up her life with the rest of her family. Her husband died earlier this year. June Kelly, BBC News at Oxford Crown Court.
It's just after midnight. The headlines here on BBC News 24. David Blunkett has left the government for the second time in 12 months. He admits making mistakes over the Ministerial Code of Conduct. The Home Secretary has signalled a climb down to MPs over plans to hold terror suspects for 90 days without charge. And a mother who killed her Down syndrome son has been spared a jail sentence.
And in sport, a good and bad night for the English clubs in the Champions League. Manchester United were beaten 1-0 at the Stade de France by Lille. That means they slipped to third in their group, testing times for Sir Alex Ferguson. A Thierry Henry goal and two from Robin van Persie made it 3-0 to Arsenal against Sparta Prague at Highbury, and that means Arsene Wenger's side cruise into the knockout stage. And in racing, the Triple Gold Cup winner Best Mate will not be buried at Exeter Racecourse, where he died on Tuesday because of government legislation. More from me later on.
The Prince of Wales and his wife, the Duchess of Cornwall, are in Washington on the second day of their American visit, their first official foreign tour as a couple. They had lunch at the White House with President Bush, and later tonight they'll be back there for dinner.
At the gates of the White House, a solitary protester with a point to make. But the truth is, even in the United States, where Diana was so popular, hardly anyone is listening now. On the South Lawn, George W. Bush, ready to receive Britain's future king and his new wife. On the balcony above, Mum has come out to get a glimpse of the visitors they've all heard so much about. Up the drive sweeps a limousine flying the royal standard. The First Lady pushes the President forward to greet Charles, but it's the person emerging from the far side of the car that everyone has really come to see. The Duchess of Cornwall is said to find the attention rather nerve-wracking, and perhaps little wonder. Just listen to all those cameras clicking. And then there are the headlines. One New York tabloid called her a frump. Others, though, were kinder and said she'd charmed people. It was nearly time to go inside for a getting-to-know-you lunch, which must have been interesting given that Prince Charles is rather too radical for this particular president on issues like global warming and possibly even Iraq. After lunch, the couple visited a school in one of the more deprived areas of Washington, and tonight they'll be back at the White House for a formal dinner with the president and senior US officials. That dinner tonight will give Prince Charles a chance to discuss something like climate change and to explain to President Bush and his officials why he feels so strongly about it. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, at the White House.
Well, indeed, the royal couple has already arrived for dinner at the White House. Let's get the latest from Washington, and our correspondent covering it for us, Laura Trevelyan. Laura, what's the latest?
Well, the latest is that the royal couple arrived about 15 minutes ago. Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall in their formal attire. And as you can probably see there, the Duchess of Cornwall looking very glamorous indeed, wearing a dark blue skirt and a black top. No tiara, interestingly. There was a lot of speculation among the press pack travelling with her. Would she be wearing a tiara, as she rather spectacularly did a couple of weeks ago? But no, a very glamorous occasion nonetheless. So now they've gone inside and the dinner has begun. Nancy Reagan is one of the guests at the dinner. An interesting link with history, that, because of course 20 years ago the Prince of Wales was here with Diana, Princess of Wales. But now of course he's here with his new wife. And as Nicholas Witchell was saying in his package there, just one lone protester outside saying this is Diana territory. But really, the general mood is that times have moved on and the Prince is here with his new wife.
And do we know anybody else on the guest list and what they're going to be eating, for example?
We do know what they're going to be eating. There's a brand new chef at the White House, as it turns out, and they're having celery soup to begin with, and then medallions of beef and Pinot Noir wine is going to be served. But yes, also on the guest list, Condoleezza Rice, the US Secretary of State, Donald Rumsfeld, the US Defense Secretary, and many other prominent members of George Bush's administration. But Nancy Reagan, the chief guest from the political past, also the president's father, George Bush Sr., and his wife, Barbara Bush, will be among those. As to what the topic of conversation might be, we do know that when the Prince and the Duchess of Cornwall had lunch earlier on today with the President and with the First Lady Laura Bush, they talked about sustainable farming, something of course the Prince is very keen on, and apparently the President said that he'd quite like his ranch in Texas to become sustainable.
Laura, many thanks for joining us. Laura Trevelyan there at the White House in Washington. Now let's take a look at the front pages of some of the morning papers, many of them talking about a difficult 24 hours in politics for the Prime Minister. The Independent calls it a day of hell for Tony Blair following David Blunkett's resignation and an extremely narrow victory by a majority of 1 in the Commons, a new offence on plans to create a new offence of glorifying terrorism. The Guardian is treating the story in much the same manner, calling it Blair's day of calamity. The Telegraph claims that the Prime Minister is losing his grip on the government, saying Blunkett's resignation means the loss of a key cabinet ally. And the Daily Mail also says David Blunkett's resignation calls into question the Prime Minister's own power base. The Daily Mirror's front page claims that all 4 of the July the 7th London bombers had been tracked by security services a year ago, but the investigation was subsequently dropped when nothing suspicious was found in their behaviour. And the Daily Express has an article about employees at the Inland Revenue being banned from sending charity Christmas boxes to needy children overseas. Well, now for a closer look at the morning's papers, I'm joined by Trist Reed-Smith from the Pink paper. Trist, what have you found for us? No prizes for guessing, of course.
No, well, obviously everybody's completely dominated well into the papers by the Blunkett resignation. And I thought this was interesting on page 2 of The Independent. It's a bit of an examination of how it affects Blair's own authority. And it does highlight some of the other things which have happened this week, as well as the Blunkett story itself. It makes some interesting points about how Blunkett rose within the ranks of the Labour Party, how he became important to the reform process, and how that meant that he had a very personal relationship with the Prime Minister.
He was the darling, wasn't he?
Absolutely. And actually, in a sense, like you might have said Mandelson as well, we were very personally close. And I think that the difficulty with that is it probably made him feel he was a bit invincible, and some of his comments about his colleagues illustrate that.
Do you think he became a bit arrogant then?
I suspect that that was something about his personality, and I think that someone commented earlier in the day that that's something he had almost instilled in him as a child who was obviously blind and so on. He had to be tough, which is a positive thing, and probably helped him get a long way. But it might have also been a cause of his downfall. Mm. But obviously, it also puts it in the wider context the very, very close vote on the anti-terror bill. The problems the Prime Minister faces getting through his reform package, and if he wants to hold onto power for another couple of years, it's really saying that he's going to face a challenge from his own benches about how to do that.
Yes, he nearly did that today, didn't he? With losing by gaining by just one vote
very
on that, and they obviously could see what was about to happen there and quickly agreed to a discussion behind the scenes, as it were.
It was weird because that has been an accident waiting to happen for months. And the fact that they left it to the 11th hour before they did anything about it, I don't think I'll ever understand that. But there you go.
Perhaps they enjoy sailing close to the wind. They certainly did over the smoking and education as well.
Smoking and education.
Quite a few, yeah.
And then they've got this council tax thing coming up soon, which is going to be possibly a major hit for them. So it's not a good week.
No. Okay, what's next?
This is a report in The Sun, and several papers cover it. It's new studies from the National Audit Office, which says that the NHS is actually killing 34,000 patients a year.
That's not quite what you expect to read, is it?
No, and actually they say that it could be as many as 80,000. This is not the figure, as far as I understand it, about 5,000 deaths from the superbug, from MRSA. This is an additional one, and it's done by medical blunders, probably things like wrong medication and so on, and also by things which happen in hospitals, accidents, falls, and so on and so forth.
So they are deaths clearly attributable to the NHS.
That's one of the difficulties with this story, is it doesn't explain exactly how it's done. But yes, they are deaths which can certainly be linked to what's happened to people within hospital, whether or not it's actually there's a fault at play here. But what it is certainly causing is millions and millions of pounds worth of compensation claims, and billions of pounds worth of lost bedtime and so on. The difficulty of the story, and actually I've read it in several of the papers today, and it's not just The Sun, but they didn't put it into context of how many people are treated by the NHS and how many deaths you might reasonably expect. Yeah. They also didn't put it into the context, but we do know that people are sick and vulnerable, and that does lead them to be more likely to have a fall. Old people who are having a hip operation do have falls, and if you don't grant them a mobility, they never get better. So there's those two things to be factored in.
Okay, and next? What a designer.
Yes. This is leading designer, Jessica Ogden, has offices in Kentish Town near me. She had some items missing, which went missing between her studio in North London in Kentish Town and Selfridges. They were stolen, and they were flogged on eBay. And she reported the problem to both eBay and to the police. But the Metropolitan Police didn't take action immediately. They took 3 days to come back to her and talk to her about it. eBay apparently don't take action unless the police tell them to.
Were they actually the garments, or were they just copies?
No, they are actual garments, handcrafted garments, yeah. And she's actually contacted the people who bought them.
So they're stolen goods?
Stolen goods, being sold completely openly. £360 hand-knitted cardigan being sold for 31 quid.
Wow. Wow, I'm thinking somebody got a bargain. Sorry, that's not quite the point, is it?
It isn't. And actually, I understand the seller's still online. One of the weird things about this is that it does highlight a trend of the power of the internet, and it does seem that the internet could be starting, and sites like eBay in particular, could be starting to replace car boot sales and the
how it's actually ahead of the law as well in some instances.
Absolutely, and needs to be tightened up. Yeah. But certainly not much action when there could have been an easy way of catching these people.
Yes. Okay, and.
But no, this is a nice story from the Mail. There's two little bits here. There's a nice picture at the top of a deer who got into a tangle at Dublin's picture. Phoenix Park. Maybe feeling slightly saucy because it's the rutting season. They're going to have to catch him tomorrow because they couldn't catch him today and get the netting off him. But the interesting thing is down the bottom. These are, I'm going to mispronounce this, capuchin monkeys. And there's been a study by boffins at Yale University, published in New Scientist, which says that if you give these monkeys coins of a type which can represent money, they will start using them for buying apple and cucumber, and they can recognize a bargain, and they like a gamble, and they understand that they should only hand over a coin if they're getting something back for it. So basically, monkey business. Monkey business,
yes, absolutely. Okay, and we've got time just for the Telegraph.
Finally, yes, this is a former South African cop called Deirdre Coetzee, who used to do the gun-ridden streets of Johannesburg. He is now having a slightly more calm time in Nottinghamshire, but doing very well. He's hit 309 arrests so far this year.
On his bike?
On his bike, I understand. 309 arrests this year. That's more than the previous record of 305 in a year. And of course, he's got 2 months to spare. So he's doing rather well, really.
Taking a holiday now, I should think. Okay, Tris Reeve-Smith, many thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
This is BBC News 24. Still to come. Bill Clinton leads the tributes at the funeral of Rosa Parks, the woman who started America's modern civil rights movement. Let's get the weather first with Kirsty McCabe.
Hello there, good morning. For many of us, it is going to be a rude awakening today. We have heavy rain and strong to gale force winds to contend with, especially in western areas. Now, the strongest winds will be across parts of Devon and Cornwall. Could see gusts of around 75 miles per hour along the coasts. Windy too across southern parts of Wales, and much of Wales will see a lot of rain today. Further north into Northern Ireland, a few heavy showers here. Some heavier rain perhaps across southwest Scotland, especially Dumfries and Galloway. The winds, though, lighter for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Perhaps the odd glimmer of sunshine across northeast England first thing. But as we head our way further south, we see the stronger winds yet again and the wet weather as well. So a nasty rush hour this morning. We take a look at the rest of the day then. I think we hold on to the heavy and blustery showers for many of us, so a good chance of getting wet today, and it will feel rather chilly in the strong winds despite highs of 17.
What Howard would or would not like is beginning to irritate me. We shall take control of the tomb.
Egypt. The search continues Sunday at 9 on BBC One.
This is BBC News 24. It's a little after midnight. Let's get an update on our top stories. David Blunkett has apologised for embarrassing Tony Blair after resigning from the Cabinet. He quit after saying he was guilty of making a mistake on 3 occasions and was now paying the price for it. He'd faced strong criticism that he broke the ministerial code by taking a business directorship without consulting a special committee. John Hutton will replace Mr Blunkett as Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. He takes charge of his first main department ahead of a major review of the country's benefits system. Plans to hold terror suspects for 90 days without charge may be watered down. The Home Secretary Charles Clarke has told the House of Commons that he'll hold urgent discussions in order to get consensus among MPs, many of whom opposed such an increase. A 67-year-old mother who admitted the manslaughter of her son who had Down syndrome has been spared prison. Gwendolyn Markrow smothered her 36-year-old son Patrick as he slept. The court expressed some sympathy at her plight and gave her a 2-year suspended sentence. Thousands of mourners have attended the funeral of the civil rights campaigner Rosa Parks. She made history in the 1950s when she defied racial segregation, refusing to give up her seat on a bus for a white man. She died last week at the age of 92. The Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall are dining with President George Bush and the First Lady. It's thought the dinner will provide Prince Charles with an opportunity to discuss issues such as climate change with the President. Now, if you want more on any of those stories, you can get it on our interactive news service, BBC I. You can access all the latest news, plus up-to-the-minute sport, entertainment and the weather headlines. Just press the red button on your handset. Well, more now on David Blunkett's resignation. At a lunchtime press conference, he set out the details of why he felt he had to go.
What I am clear about is that I've made a mistake. I said so last weekend. Tony Blair at Prime Minister's Questions dealt with the 3 key issues. Should I have written to the advisory committee informing the chairman of the offices I intended to take outside government, the companies that I had an association with? And the answer is yes. The correspondence we had in March led me to believe that there was some confusion and therefore that this committee was voluntary and not mandatory. I am clearly wrong about that. Points. Was I at fault in not writing to the committee? Yes, I was. It was the same fault on 3 occasions, arising precisely from the same misunderstanding by me. And I have to take the consequences of that, which is why I'm stepping down today. Did I do anything wrong in buying a holding in DNA Biosciences? No, I didn't. Did I declare that holding when I came back into government? Yes, I did. Not only did I declare it in the required fashion, but I put it on my press release on May the 6th and on the website from the department. I don't think any other minister coming into government has ever done that before. And there are real issues for those, including the shadow leader of the House, who have made a great song and dance about this as to what will happen in future should there ever be, God forbid, an incoming Conservative government. Having investments and holding shares in modern Britain is not a crime. Declaring them is an imperative. And on the third point, which was raised and Tony Blair dealt with at Prime Minister's questions, let me say this. Not only had I declared that holding and those connections, but I ensured that there was a firewall between me and any decisions to be taken for the Child Support Agency in relation to DNA testing. I'm deeply sorry for the embarrassment that I've caused to the Prime Minister. As we saw at Prime Minister's questions today from Michael Howard, it is the Prime Minister that some people wish to target. I wish to support him. I wish him to continue carrying forward the modernisation and reform agenda. I'm proud of our government, and I hope in future not, of course, to return to government, but to play a part in public life in using the experience I've gained over 40 years as an elected representative. When you've been in politics as long as I have, you can smell and feel when it is right to step away. And I felt that between Downing Street and Portcullis House.
Well, as David Blunkett referred there earlier at Prime Minister's questions, the Conservative leader Michael Howard used the David Blunkett's resignation to attack the Prime Minister's position. But Blair defended his decision not to sack Mr Blunkett.
This has been an extraordinary week for the government and for the Prime Minister. We have seen the slow seepage of his authority turn into a hemorrhage. We all acknowledge the honourable way in which the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions has decided to resign, and I pay tribute to him for that. But the key question now is for the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister think that in his handling of this affair, his judgment has been at fault in any way?
Well, let me tell him exactly why I did not believe that the allegations made against my right honourable friend warranted his dismissal. And perhaps with the frenzy that is going on around this, it's just as well for the House and for members of the public just to explain why not. There were basically three sets of allegations, and perhaps I can just be allowed to detail my reasons why I decided not to dismiss them. There were three sets of allegations. One was that he had not sought the advice of the Independent Advisory Committee, which he should have done. That is a breach of the Ministerial Code, it is true. I did not believe that it warranted dismissal for these reasons. First of all, I could discover no impropriety or wrongdoing in his doing that. Secondly, he had actually registered these things. He had registered these jobs with the Register of Members' Interests. It arose out of a misunderstanding on the correspondence, which I looked at myself and believed was an honest misunderstanding on his part, and it was clear to me that even had he been in touch with the advisory committee, as he accepts he should have done, the most that would have happened is that in respect of one of those jobs, his taking up of that job would have been delayed by a few weeks. In those circumstances, I did not believe it warranted his dismissal.
David Blunkett made his name in politics in Sheffield and has been an MP in the city for nearly 20 years. BBC Look North's Kirsty Mitchell has spent the day there to find out how much support he can still expect back home.
It was like Groundhog Day at the Sheffield Star this morning as news of yet another Blunkett resignation rolled off the presses. They've seen it all before, but that doesn't make the news any less shocking.
David Blunkett has been a very good thing for Sheffield. He's supported Sheffield in very many ways at the very highest level. And I think there'll be many, many people in Sheffield today who will feel a great sadness that this champion of one of our great cities has not now got the influence that he formerly had.
A second fall from grace for David Blunkett, no longer at Tony's side as a member of his government. This time the error of judgment over an undeclared company directorship while he was out of the cabinet.
I hope in future not, of course, to return to government, but to play a part in public life in using the experience I've gained over 40 years as an elected representative to be able to improve and continue improving the life chances and the well-being of the people I serve.
And he might also have some explaining to do on the streets of his own city, where some clearly feel let down by recent events.
Well, I think it's disgusting. He's experienced and he shouldn't have got himself into this trouble.
Well, he's just causing more trouble than he's worth most of the time, isn't he? He's an embarrassment to the government.
No, he's done too much, hasn't he? He should know better than to keep doing what he's doing.
No, I think he's being pressured into doing that, and now they're going to have to worry about finding somebody else to do his job. I think he should just carry on doing his job.
Others remain fiercely loyal. His election agent believes he's been hounded out of office.
I think his constituents will have same feelings as me. They may not be as angry as I am, but they'll be very disappointed, very shocked. There's a great deal of respect for David in Sheffield Brightside.
And so it's back to Sheffield once again for Mr Blunkett and to the life of a constituency MP. But having been at the heart of government for so long, it's doubtful whether Brightside will present enough of a challenge for him. Kirsty Mitchell, BBC Look North, Sheffield.
Britain's pensions crisis is the most urgent problem that David Blunkett's successor must deal with. A new report says women are particularly at risk because many aren't able to build up their entitlement to a state pension.
Enjoying family memories but worried about the future. Penny and Martin Grossman's daughters have grown up and it might have been time to take life easy. But because Penny took time away from work to bring up the children, she'd never built up a pension fund and she's concerned about that.
I can see myself having to work way past retirement age, probably well into my 80s I'll still be working, because I really don't see how else I will be able to live. Advisors have advised that we should save, but now the money that I would put away would absolutely give me virtually nothing.
At Westminster, pensions poverty is a big issue and the figures explain why. 2.2 million women will not qualify for a basic state pension. 11.3 million men and women have no private pension savings, so will have to fall back on the state pension. It's estimated that £57 billion of extra savings is needed to ensure a decent standard of living in retirement for everyone. This expert argued 3 years ago in a report for the government that urgent action was required. He says Mr Blunkett's successor faces a big challenge.
It's central because it deals with both wealth creation and wealth distribution. It's not a one-dimensional challenge. One has to take account of education, finance, social policy. It's a job for a statesman, not a mere politician.
There could be problems for younger families. Joanne Cotter quit her job when her first child was born and has had to stop saving.
I am concerned about it, but we didn't really have much option, because when I left with only one income coming in and 2 children to support, there's no money left for me to continue to put into my pension.
The options include compulsory pension saving for everyone and working longer. That's a lot for the new minister to think about. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
In France, President Chirac has appealed for calm after a 6th night of rioting in the suburbs of Paris. Gangs of youth set cars alight and fought with police. The trouble started last week after the death of 2 teenagers, apparently being chased by police in Clichy-sous-Bois.
Parked up and awaiting the call. The French riot police tonight gathered in large numbers. One half of a confrontation that has lasted a week and is being watched by the whole country. It has been like this night after night.